Overnight, an unexpected scene outside the International Space Station. That's a leak.
Oh, it's an explained leak.
A significant leak.
When I was commanding the International Space Station, we had a significant coolant leak.
I imagine there are no insignificant leaks in space.
These things do happen.
It's not, something we don't have plans for.
Right.
Do we know that was coolant, and have they figured out how to fix it?
Yes, we know it was coolant. Kind of similar to what you would see in your car.
Like briny water.
But,
okay.
you
but
don't
you're in
want
space.
You're in space, which means it's much more difficult to fix.
It's a pretty big problem.
Just about 3 hours now since we first observed what you're seeing on the screen, that being a leak.
You can only leak so long, and then eventually you stop leaking because you run out of fluid.
Not everybody can be a robot polisher.
This leak you're seeing that again began about 3 hours ago. The fluid that you're seeing in the form of snowflake-like particles, a fairly substantial flow of coolant particles in the form of snowflakes, if you will. It is a bit odd. Do not know what the source of that stream of particles is. Stream of flakes leaking fairly substantially. But we are still awaiting confirmation as to what the substance is that is either leaking or streaming out of the Soyuz. Fairly sizable leak. It's a visible stream of flakes, propagation of snowflake-like particles looking like a snow shower.
Space is tough, especially whenever you're trying to show video from space.
On the ground in the water tank, on orbit, essentially the same picture.
Matthias Maurer was wrapping up a 7-hour-long spacewalk outside the International Space Station when he noticed water leaking into his helmet. It was eerily similar to what happened to an Italian astronaut back in 2013. Luca Parmitano's spacesuit was leaking into his helmet, and he almost drowned.
For a couple of minutes there, maybe more than a couple of minutes, I experienced what it's like to be a goldfish in the fishbowl from the point of view of the goldfish.
Water on it filled up in his ear cups, and it started to creep into his eyes and covered his nose.
And obviously, if you fill the helmet, you can't breathe.
Next on Jonathan Bird's Blue World, Jonathan goes to inner space.
I'm standing on the International Space Station!
So many times during spacewalks outside the International Space Station, we can see air bubbles rising up. Can you touch on how there are air bubbles in space?
Can you be more specific, air bubbles?
So yeah, like a lot of times during the NASA footage, you can see bubbles coming up out of the helmets or kind of from underneath you. How do you explain bubbles in space?
Yeah, often on the outside of the space station, you'll liberate little pieces of, it's a really harsh environment out there, and the outside of the space station gets beat up pretty good. And sometimes, you'll see just little flecks of paint or something that you might have disrupted floating away from the suit. And, that's generally what that is. I've never seen any kind of air bubble anywhere.
Bubbles in space?
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
No?
Hashtag bubbles in space. What is that?
Yeah, you were asked that 2 times in the past couple months, actually.
Oh, you're that guy.
I'm one of those guys.
Yeah, I'm not gonna write that.
Space is tough, especially whenever you're trying to show video from space.
Not everybody can be a robot polisher.
I experienced what it's like to be a goldfish in a fishbowl.